I never thought the people who raised me would one day look me straight in the eye and say, "You don't belong here anymore." It was the night my father's will was read. My siblings sat across the long oak table in the family lawyer's office, their arms folded, their smirks barely hidden. And then, in one brutal sentence, they tried to erase me, my name left out, my place in the family torn away like I had never existed. I walked out of that office trembling, my mother avoiding my eyes, my brother Daniel whispering under his breath, "Told you she wouldn't last." The house I grew up in, the one where I learned to ride a bike in the driveway and carved my initials into the porch, suddenly felt like enemy territory. And yet life has a way of turning tables. Because today, those same people who pushed me out can't even set foot in that house without my permission. Have you ever been shut out by your own family, treated like an outsider in the place you once called home? When people hear the phrase family home, they usually think of comfort, safety, or, at least, belonging. For me, growing up in the suburbs of Ohio, that old white two-story house with the green shutters was more than just a roof over my head. It was supposed to be my anchor. The smell of fresh apple pie drifting from the kitchen on Sunday afternoons, the creak of the staircase where I used to sit and eavesdrop on grown-up conversations, even the chipped paint on the porch railing, all of it was part of my childhood heartbeat. My name is Emily Carter, and I was the middle child of three. My older brother, Daniel Carter, was the golden boy, tall, athletic, straight-A student, the kind of son who made my parents beam at every parent-teacher conference. My younger sister, Megan Carter, was the baby of the family, sweet, delicate, endlessly doted upon. And then there was me, caught between, always trying to be noticed, always trying to prove I was worth just as much. But if you had seen us from the outside, you wouldn't have guessed there was any imbalance. We looked like the all-American family. My dad, Robert Carter, worked as a contractor, always in worn jeans and steel-toe boots, smelling faintly of sawdust when he came home. My mom, Linda Carter, was a homemaker with a soft smile and a talent for making everything look effortless, whether it was decorating the house for Christmas or ironing my brother's baseball uniforms. Some of my earliest memories are of summer evenings when the neighborhood kids would gather in our backyard. Dad built a swing set with his own hands, and all the kids wanted to play there. I remember being 5 years old, watching Daniel push Megan on the swing while Mom clapped proudly. When it was my turn, Dad would push me, but softer, almost distracted, already looking back toward Daniel. It wasn't cruelty, it was subtle, quiet favoritism. The kind a child feels, but doesn't yet know how to name. Still, I loved them fiercely. I loved family dinners where we'd all sit around the big oak table. Dad at the head, carving roast chicken. Mom passing mashed potatoes. Daniel bragging about his baseball wins. Megan showing off her drawings. And me trying to squeeze in a story about the book I was reading or the A I'd gotten on a spelling test. Sometimes they listened, sometimes they didn't. But in those moments, the laughter, the clinking silverware, the hum of home, I felt like I belonged. Holidays were magical. Every Christmas morning, we'd race down the stairs to find presents stacked high beneath the tree. Daniel always seemed to get the big-ticket gifts, like the shiny red bike or the latest video game console. Megan got the dolls, the dresses, the things she had circled in catalogs. And me? I got thoughtful gifts, practical ones. Books, sweaters, art kits. Things Mom said would help me grow. I smiled, said thank you, and tried to hide the sting when Daniel smirked or Megan twirled in her new dress. But I held on to the moments of closeness. Like the time Dad let me help him build a treehouse. I remember the smell of sawdust, the heat of the summer sun, the way my hands blistered on the hammer handle. He told me, "Emily, you're tougher than you think." That was one of the few times I felt like he really saw me. School was another place where I tried to stand out. I wasn't a star athlete like Daniel, but I was smart. I loved writing essays, diving into books, creating whole worlds with my words. My teachers praised me, sometimes even pulling my parents aside to say how talented I was. Mom would smile politely, but then brush it off. "Oh, Emily just loves to read. It keeps her busy." I craved for them to be proud, the way they were with Daniel when he hit a home run, or with Megan when she performed in the school play. The older we got, the more the differences showed. Daniel went off to college on a sports scholarship, and the whole family drove out to see him on campus, Dad bursting with pride. Megan, meanwhile, was the princess of the house, shielded from responsibility, praised for every little thing she did. And me? I worked hard, kept my head down, got good grades, and dreamed of becoming a journalist. When I got accepted into NYU, I thought, finally, they'll look at me the way they look at Daniel. I remember waving the acceptance letter in front of Mom. She smiled, said, "That's nice, honey. But New York is so far. Wouldn't you rather stay closer to home?" Dad barely looked up from his newspaper. Megan pouted because my news overshadowed her dance recital. And Daniel? He just smirked and said, "Good luck in the big city. Don't get eaten alive." I went anyway, and for the first time I felt free. New York was loud, messy, alive. I thrived there. I wrote articles for the school paper, I interned at small magazines, I walked the streets like they belonged to me. Every phone call home, though, was the same. Mom asking more about Daniel's career than my writing. Dad reminding me not to forget where you come from. Megan complaining about how hard her life was, despite still living at home. Fully supported. But I kept visiting. Every Thanksgiving, every Christmas. I kept trying. Because no matter how many times they dismissed me, they were still my family. There was one particular Christmas when the cracks really began to show. I was 22, freshly graduated, working at a local paper. I had just published a feature that got recognition in the city. I was glowing with pride, eager to share the news. At Christmas dinner, I started telling everyone about it. Halfway through my story, Daniel interrupted to announce his engagement to his girlfriend, Rachel. The room erupted in cheers, hugs, champagne toasts. My story died on my lips. No one even asked me what the article was about. That night, lying awake in my old bedroom, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars I'd stuck to the ceiling as a child, I realized something painful. In their eyes, I would never be the star. And yet, despite that, I stayed close. When Dad got sick, I drove back from New York almost every weekend. I sat with him during chemo sessions, held his hand when he was too weak to eat, read him the articles I was working on. Mom cooked. Daniel showed up when he could. Megan cried a lot but rarely helped. I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd see how much I cared. The night before Dad passed, he squeezed my hand and whispered, "You always were the strong one, Emily." Those words burned into me, a lifeline I clung to even after he was gone. After the funeral, things shifted quickly. Daniel moved into Dad's role like it was his birthright, handling finances, making decisions. Mom leaned on him heavily. Megan drifted further into her bubble. And me? I felt myself fading into the background, the one who carried the emotional weight but got none of the recognition. Looking back now, I see how it was always building toward what would come later. The exile, the betrayal. But at the time, I still held hope. I still believed that blood meant loyalty, that family meant forever. Because no matter how overlooked I felt, no matter how many times my voice was drowned out at that oak dinner table, I kept telling myself, this is my family. They'll never truly turn on me. I was wrong. When my father passed away, I told myself his absence might bring us closer together. Grief, after all, has a strange way of bonding people. But in our case, grief seemed to sharpen the edges, magnify old patterns, and draw lines in places where I hadn't even known there were boundaries. The weeks after the funeral were a blur of casseroles, sympathy cards, and hushed conversations in the living room. Neighbors dropped off food. Old friends of my dad stopped by to share stories. Mom sat in her armchair looking smaller than I'd ever seen her. Daniel took charge, paying bills, organizing meetings, talking to the lawyer. Megan floated around like a ghost, crying often, retreating to her room for hours at a time. And me? I cleaned. I sorted Dad's tools in the garage, I folded laundry, I made lists of what needed to be done. It was my way of coping, my way of staying useful. But usefulness doesn't always equal recognition. I remember one afternoon, about 2 weeks after the funeral, Daniel and Mom were sitting at the kitchen table going over some paperwork. I walked in carrying a stack of Dad's old clothes I had just washed, ready to pack them for donation. "Emily," Daniel said without looking up, "could you not touch Dad's things without asking? We'll decide what to do with them." I froze, the scent of laundry detergent still clinging to the shirts in my arms. "I just thought." "We'll decide," he repeated, sharper this time. Mom didn't say a word. She just kept staring at the papers. I carried the clothes back upstairs, my throat tight, telling myself not to cry. It wasn't the words, really. It was the way he said them, like I was an intruder in my own home, like I had no right to grieve in my own way. It became a pattern. Every time I tried to help, I was met with resistance. When I suggested we create a memory book of Dad's life, filled with photos and stories, Daniel rolled his eyes. "Not everything has to be a project, Em. Some things you just let go." When I offered to help Mom manage the bills, she waved me off. "Your brother's handling it. You just focus on your writing." Even Megan, who used to lean on me for advice, started snapping. "You're always trying to act like you're in charge. You don't have to control everything." Control. That was the word they used over and over, like my desire to contribute was some kind of threat. The tension wasn't just about tasks, it seeped into family gatherings too. The first Thanksgiving without Dad was painful enough. But sitting around that oak table, I felt the shift more acutely than ever. Daniel carved the turkey, a role Dad always held, and looked so proud doing it. Mom praised him endlessly, just like your father used to. I tried to share a story about Dad, about how he once burned the turkey, but made us all laugh so hard we didn't care. Halfway through, Megan interrupted. "Emily, can you pass the cranberry sauce?" The conversation shifted instantly. My story died. No one asked me to finish. It was small, but it cut deep. Later that evening, after dessert, Daniel brought out old photo albums. We sat flipping through them, laughing at childhood pictures. Until I noticed something. In almost every story they told, I was absent. Daniel's baseball games. Megan's dance recitals. Family vacations where I was in the background, but never the center. "Remember this?" Daniel said, pointing at a photo of him holding a trophy. Mom beamed. "Oh yes, that was such a proud day." "Emily, weren't you there?" Megan asked casually. I was. I'd been the one holding the banner in the stands, screaming until my throat was raw. But no one remembered. I excused myself to the bathroom and locked the door, staring at my reflection. My cheeks flushed with shame and anger. I whispered to myself, it's like I never existed. Christmas was worse. The house was decorated beautifully. Mom always went all out. The smell of cinnamon filled the air. Stockings hung on the fireplace. But the moment gifts were exchanged, I felt the weight of the imbalance. Daniel got a sleek new watch, an expensive brand. Megan unwrapped a trip to a spa resort, all expenses paid. I opened my gift to find a candle. A nice candle, yes, but still just a candle. I smiled, said thank you, tried to hide the ache in my chest. That night, as I sat on the edge of my childhood bed holding that candle, I wondered if gifts were symbolic. Maybe, in their eyes, Daniel was the achiever, Megan was the treasure, and I was an afterthought. It wasn't just holidays. It was constant, everyday remarks that chipped away at me. When I shared an article I'd written that got published in a national magazine, Mom said, "That's nice, honey, but you know writing doesn't pay the bills." When I mentioned I was considering buying a small apartment in New York, Daniel smirked. "Don't overreach. You don't want to end up asking for help later." When I offered to host Easter one year, Megan laughed outright. "Emily, no offense, but your apartment is tiny. Where would we all even sit?" I laughed with them to keep the peace, but each comment was a stone added to the pile of resentment building inside me. The breaking point in this early betrayal phase came during a family barbecue. It was summer, the backyard alive with chatter, the grill sizzling. Neighbors were over, cousins too. At some point, the conversation turned to careers. Daniel talked about his promotion. Megan bragged about a dance performance. Then someone asked me what I was up to. Before I could answer, Daniel cut in. "Emily writes, what is it again? Opinion pieces? It's kind of like a hobby, right?" Laughter rippled around the table. I swallowed hard. Actually, I'm a columnist for the New York Herald. It's a full-time job. Oh, sure, Daniel said, raising his beer. But when are you going to get a real career? Everyone chuckled. Everyone except me. I excused myself, went into the kitchen, and gripped the counter until my knuckles turned white. My chest burned with humiliation. Looking back, I can see the patterns so clearly. They weren't just minimizing me, they were slowly, deliberately erasing me, turning me into the lesser one, the expendable sibling. And the cruelest part? I kept trying. I kept showing up, kept bringing gifts, kept calling home every Sunday. I kept trying to earn a place that should have been mine by birthright. But families like mine, they don't always reward loyalty. Sometimes they punish it. And deep down, a part of me knew something bigger was coming. Because small betrayals don't stay small forever. They build. They harden. They set the stage for something devastating. Something that would change everything. It all came to a head on a cold February afternoon, in a conference room that smelled faintly of old paper and fresh coffee. The letter had arrived 2 weeks earlier, an official envelope stamped with the name of my father's longtime attorney, Mr. Thomas Green. Inside was a summons, the reading of my father's will. I didn't think much of it at first. Dad was always meticulous, and I assumed this was just another part of the process. Painful, yes, but necessary. I showed up to the lawyer's office wearing a black dress and the necklace Dad had given me for my high school graduation. My hands shook as I signed in at the front desk. When I walked into the conference room, I froze. There they were, Daniel in his sharp gray suit, Rachel beside him with her perfectly styled hair, Megan, in pastel pink, scrolling on her phone, Mom at the end of the table, her face tired but unreadable. The moment I sat down, Daniel smirked. Glad you could make it, Em. His tone carried the weight of something I couldn't quite place. Mr. Green shuffled his papers, adjusted his glasses, and began. The first part was simple enough. Standard legal language. Assets, debts, distribution. My father had left behind the house, his savings, his tools, his investments. And then came the blow. To my beloved son, Daniel Carter, I leave the Carter family home, with all its contents, to do with as he sees fit. My breath caught. The house? Our house? The place where I had grown up, the one I had spent countless nights caring for Dad during his illness? Given entirely to Daniel? To my daughter, Megan Carter, I leave the trust account established in her name, as well as the family heirlooms belonging to my wife's side. My heart pounded. A trust account? Heirlooms? And to my daughter, Emily Carter. Finally, I held my breath, waiting. I leave my collection of books, journals, and personal writings. That was it. Books, journals, paper. The room tilted. I felt the blood drain from my face. Daniel cleared his throat, fighting a grin. Megan whispered something to Rachel and giggled. I turned to my mother. Mom, is this right? She looked down at her hands, silent. Books. My voice cracked. That's all. Mr. Green adjusted his glasses again, his tone careful. This was your father's final will and testament. I'm sorry. I wanted to scream, to stand up and flip the table. Instead, I sat frozen, my chest burning, my ears ringing. Daniel leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. Well, that settles it. Megan smiled sweetly. I guess Dad knew what was best for all of us. The rest of the meeting blurred. Papers were signed. Copies were handed out. I felt like I was watching from outside my own body. When it was over, I stumbled into the hallway, my heels echoing against the marble floor. My mother followed, her voice low. Emily, maybe it's for the best. You live in New York. You don't need the house. I spun around, tears stinging my eyes. Don't need it? Mom, that's my home. I took care of Dad in that house. I was there. Her gaze hardened. Daniel's the one who can manage it. You've always been different. Different. The words sliced through me like a knife. I left without another word. The days after the will reading were a haze of rage and sorrow. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. My tiny apartment in New York felt suffocating. Everywhere I looked, I saw reminders of my father. The books on my shelves, the smell of sawdust that still clung to the jacket I had borrowed from his closet. I replayed that moment over and over. The smirk on Daniel's face, the silence of my mother, the way Megan looked at me like I was a stranger. Had I imagined it all? The nights sitting by Dad's bedside, reading him stories? The afternoons in the backyard, hammering nails into the treehouse he said was ours? The whispered words, "You're the strong one, Emily," had they meant nothing? Then came the phone call. It was a Saturday morning. I was making coffee when my phone buzzed. Daniel's number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Emily," he said smoothly, "we need to talk about the house." My chest tightened. "What about it?" "Well, Mom and Megan and I agree that it doesn't make sense for you to come around anymore. It's Daniel's house now. You don't live here. You've got your city life. We don't want any confusion." Confusion? My voice rose. "It's my home too." "Not anymore," he said flatly. Dad made his choice. I was silent. My hand trembled so badly, I nearly dropped the phone. "Oh, and Emily?" Daniel added, his tone dripping with cruelty. "If you try to make this difficult, don't. You'll just embarrass yourself." He hung up. I stood there in my kitchen, phone pressed against my ear long after the line went dead. For the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to be truly abandoned by your own blood. But abandonment wasn't the end. A week later, I drove back to Ohio anyway. I couldn't stay away. I needed to see the house, needed to breathe the air of my childhood one more time. When I pulled into the driveway, Daniel's car was parked out front. The curtains in the living room were drawn shut. I walked up the porch steps and turned the doorknob. Locked. I knocked. No answer. I knocked harder. Finally, Daniel opened the door, his face smug. "What are you doing here?" "This is my home," I said, my voice shaking. He laughed. "Not anymore." I tried to step inside. He blocked the doorway. "Daniel, don't make this harder than it has to be," he said. "You don't belong here." The words hit me like a physical blow. I staggered back, tears blurring my vision. Behind him, I could see the family photos still on the wall. Dad's chair still in the corner. My childhood still alive inside that house. And yet, I was standing on the porch like a stranger. He shut the door in my face. The sound of it echoed in my ears long after I walked back to my car. That was the moment. The breaking point. The crisis that would define everything that followed. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. My chest heaved, sobs racking my body. And then, beneath the grief, beneath the betrayal, a fire began to burn. If they wanted me out, if they thought they could erase me, they had no idea who they were dealing with. Because I wasn't going to disappear quietly. Not this time. The door slamming in my face should have been the end. For most people, maybe it would have been. They would have walked away, licked their wounds, and accepted defeat. But something snapped inside me that day on the porch. For years I had played the role they cast me in, the quiet one, the overlooked one, the expendable one. But I wasn't expendable. I wasn't invisible. I wasn't powerless. And if they wanted me out, I was going to show them just how wrong they were. The first thing I did was call Mr. Green. "Emily," he said gently when he picked up, "I know this is difficult." "Difficult?" I interrupted, my voice shaking with fury. "Mr. Green, my father didn't mean to cut me out. He couldn't have." There was silence on the other end, then a sigh. "I shouldn't say this, but Robert drafted an earlier will. One where things were divided equally. Then, 6 months before he passed, he made changes." 6 months. My mind raced. That's when he was so sick he could barely hold a pen. Mr. Green hesitated. He dictated the changes. Daniel was present. The words hit me like thunder. "Daniel." "Of course. Can I see the earlier will?" I asked. "Legally, it's not valid anymore," he said carefully. "But yes, I can show you a copy." 2 days later, I sat in his office staring at the document. My father's signature at the bottom. His words leaving everything divided equally among the three of us. Proof that once, he had wanted me to have a rightful place. And then Daniel had inserted himself. Manipulated. Twisted. The anger that had been simmering in me since that night exploded into clarity. I wasn't just going to fight. I was going to win. The weeks that followed were a blur of paperwork, meetings, and sleepless nights. I hired my own lawyer, a sharp, determined woman named Jessica Monroe, who didn't flinch when I told her my story. "Emily," she said firmly across the table, "if your father was coerced or manipulated when he changed his will, we can contest it. It won't be easy. Your brother will fight tooth and nail. But if you're ready to see this through, we'll make them answer." "I'm ready," I whispered. The confrontation wasn't just legal, it was deeply personal. The first time I saw Daniel after filing the contest was at Mom's house. He stormed into the living room, Megan trailing behind him. "You had the nerve to hire a lawyer?" he spat. I stood, my hands trembling but my voice steady. "Dad wanted it split equally, Daniel. You know he did." Daniel laughed coldly. "Dad wanted what was best. And you? You were never cut out for responsibility. You think you can manage a house? You can barely manage yourself. Stop it," I snapped, my voice echoing through the room. "I took care of Dad when you were too busy playing hero. I was there. I held his hand. I listened to him cry at night. Don't you dare tell me I don't deserve this." Megan folded her arms, her voice dripping with disdain. "You're making this harder for everyone, Emily. Why can't you just let it go?" "Because it's mine too," I shot back. "And I won't let you erase me." For the first time, Daniel's smirk faltered. The legal battle dragged on for months. Depositions, hearings, endless paperwork. Every time I saw Daniel in that courtroom, sitting smug beside his attorney, I felt the same fire rise in me. Mom refused to testify. Megan sided with Daniel. I was alone, but not really. Jessica was fierce, and in her, I found an ally. Piece by piece, we built the case. The timeline. Dad's deteriorating health. The inconsistencies in the new will. The witnesses who remembered me at Dad's side while Daniel was elsewhere. And then came the breakthrough. Jessica uncovered medical records showing that the very week Dad supposedly dictated those changes, he had been on heavy medication, so sedated he could barely string sentences together. It was the evidence we needed. The final hearing was the most intense day of my life. The courtroom buzzed with tension. Daniel sat across from me, Rachel clutching his arm, Megan whispering in his ear. Mom avoided my gaze, her face pale. When it was my turn to speak, I stood, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I told the court about the nights I sat with Dad, about the way he whispered, "You're the strong one, Emily," about the treehouse, the bike rides, the love he had shown me. And then I looked directly at Daniel. "You wanted me erased, but I was there. I was always there. And I won't let you steal my father's legacy, not from me, and not from the truth." My voice cracked, but I didn't falter. Jessica presented the medical records, the earlier will, the testimony of Dad's nurse who remembered Daniel pressuring him. By the time it was over, Daniel's confidence had crumbled. His smirk was gone. His jaw clenched, eyes darting nervously. The judge's ruling came 2 weeks later. The amended will was declared invalid due to undue influence. The earlier will was reinstated. The house, the assets, the legacy divided equally. But that wasn't all. Because Daniel had overstepped so egregiously, the court appointed me as the executor of the estate. I held the keys. Literally. When I drove back to the house, keys jangling in my hand, I stood on the porch where Daniel had once slammed the door in my face. This time, I unlocked it, walked inside. The smell of home hit me, the faint scent of wood polish, the creak of the floorboards. My father's chair still in the corner, sunlight streaming through the windows. I wasn't a guest anymore. I wasn't an intruder. I was the one in charge. The confrontation wasn't over, though. Word spread quickly. Daniel showed up at the house one evening, rage burning in his eyes. "You think you won, Emily?" he snarled. "This isn't over." I stood in the doorway, calm, the keys heavy in my pocket. "It is over," I said softly. "You don't get to decide who belongs anymore. Not here." Megan tried to push past me. "We're family. We have a right to be here. I shook my head. Not without my permission. The words hung in the air, heavy, final. They had once thrown me out like I was nothing. And now, the power had shifted. I closed the door gently, not slamming it like Daniel had. Just firm enough to let them know. The tables had turned. That night, I sat in the living room alone, the house quiet around me. I lit a fire in the fireplace, the crackle filling the silence. On my lap rested one of Dad's journals, the very thing they had tried to reduce me to. Inside, in his familiar scrawl, were words that made my chest ache. Emily is the heart of this family. She'll keep us together when I'm gone. Tears spilled down my cheeks. Maybe I couldn't keep us together. Maybe we were broken beyond repair. But I could keep the truth alive. And that was enough. From that moment on, the house wasn't just brick and wood to me. It was a symbol, a reminder that no matter how much they tried to erase me, I had a place. And now, if they wanted to enter, they would have to knock. And I would decide if the door opened. The day the ruling came down, I should have felt triumphant. On paper, I had won. The will was restored, my father's true intentions honored, and I was appointed executor of the estate. But the strange thing about victory is that it doesn't always feel the way you imagine. It doesn't erase the wounds. It doesn't magically stitch a broken family back together. Sometimes, it just exposes how deep the fractures really go. The first cracks appeared almost immediately. The morning after the ruling, I opened my email to find a flood of messages from extended relatives. Some congratulated me, saying justice had been served. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly remembered me. One wrote, "I always knew Daniel could be manipulative. Good for you, standing up to him." But others weren't so kind. An aunt wrote, "Family matters should never go to court. You've embarrassed us all." Another said, "Blood is blood, Emily. No house is worth tearing a family apart." I sat staring at the screen, my stomach twisting. To them, this wasn't about truth or fairness. To them, I was the troublemaker. The one who had dragged our private ugliness into the light. Then came Mom. She called 2 days later. Her voice was tight, cold. "I hope you're happy, Emily." "Mom," I whispered. "I didn't do this to hurt anyone. I did it because it's what Dad wanted. You humiliated your brother. You turned us into a spectacle. Daniel manipulated him." "Enough," she snapped. "Your father loved you, but he also knew your place. You've made sure there's no going back now. No going back." I hung up the phone and sank onto the couch, my chest heavy. My own mother, choosing silence when Daniel lied, and blame when I told the truth. It felt like losing Dad all over again. Megan wasn't any better. She sent a text, short and sharp. "You ruined everything. Don't bother calling me again." I stared at the screen, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. But what could I say? I deleted draft after draft until finally I put the phone down. She was my little sister. I used to braid her hair, help her memorize lines for her plays, sneak her candy when Mom wasn't looking. And now she wanted me gone. The grief was crushing, not just for the father I had lost, but for the family I had thought was mine. Even neighbors had their opinions. One afternoon, as I stood on the porch watering Dad's plants, Mrs. Whitman from next door waved. "Emily, dear, I heard about everything. Good for you. That house was always as much yours as theirs." Her kindness made me smile, but minutes later, another neighbor, Mr. Collins, muttered as he walked past, "Shame. Fighting your own kin like that. Your father wouldn't have wanted it." Everyone had a version of what my father would have wanted. Everyone but me seemed to forget he had whispered to me, "You're the strong one." I clung to that memory like a lifeline. At night, though, strength felt far away. The house was mine now, but it was filled with ghosts. Dad's empty chair by the fireplace. The faint indentation on his pillow upstairs. His tools lying neatly in the garage, untouched. Sometimes I swore I could hear him, his laugh echoing down the hallway, the sound of his boots on the floorboards. Other nights, it was silence that pressed in on me, heavy and suffocating. I would lie in bed staring at the ceiling, remembering the glow-in-the-dark stars I had stuck there as a kid. They were gone now, painted over long ago, but in my mind they still shimmered. A reminder of a girl who believed her family would always catch her when she fell. Now, there was no one. Grief has layers. I grieved my father every time I passed his photo on the mantel, every time I smelled sawdust in the garage, every time I heard a country song he used to hum. But I also grieved the family I thought I had. The idea of Sunday dinners that would never happen again. The illusion of siblings who had my back. The mother who would always love me unconditionally. All of it was gone. And mourning an illusion, I realized, can be even more painful than mourning a person. The worst moment came at a family gathering I wasn't invited to. It was Megan's birthday. I found out about it from a cousin's Facebook post. Photos of the backyard filled with balloons, tables of food, Daniel grinning by the grill. Mom at his side, her arm around Megan. I scrolled through the pictures with tears streaming down my face. Their eye was erased, like I had never been part of them. No one noticed my absence. No one asked. No one cared. I shut my laptop and sat in the dark, shaking. It was then I realized, maybe I had never truly belonged. Maybe I had always been on the outside, and Dad was the only one who saw me for who I was. And now he was gone. Yet even in that darkness, flickers of light appeared. Old friends reached out. My college roommate, Sarah Mitchell, drove from New York one weekend just to sit with me on the porch. We drank coffee, wrapped in blankets, watching the sunset. You know, she said softly, family isn't always blood. Sometimes it's the people who choose you. And I choose you. Her words cracked something open inside me. Later, a neighbor's son, Jake, who had grown up playing in our yard, stopped by to help mow the lawn. Mr. Carter was like a second dad to me, he said. You keeping this house that feels right. And for the first time in weeks, I felt less alone. Still, the fallout with my blood family lingered like a wound that wouldn't heal. Holidays came and went, empty of invitations. My phone stayed silent on my birthday. Every time I passed Daniel or Megan's names in my contacts, my chest tightened. But over time, I began to see the truth. I hadn't lost a family. I had uncovered the reality of one that was never really mine. What I lost was the illusion. And while that hurt, it also gave me clarity. Because I no longer had to chase approval from people determined not to give it. I no longer had to sit at tables where my voice was silenced. I could build something new. One night, sitting in the living room with Dad's journal in my lap, I read a passage I hadn't noticed before. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is let go of the ones who hold you back. Emily will understand this one day. The tears came hot and fast, but this time they weren't just grief. They were release. I whispered into the empty room. I understand now, Dad. The fallout left scars. I won't pretend it didn't. But scars are proof of survival. Proof that I stood in the fire and came out the other side. And though I mourned the family I thought I had, I began to realize something powerful. I hadn't been erased. I had been reborn. Healing doesn't happen all at once. It doesn't come in a single thunderclap moment where everything suddenly feels better. For me, it came in quiet ripples, small choices, small victories, that slowly began to piece me back together. At first, I thought healing meant filling the silence. I threw myself into work, into late nights writing, into saying yes to every assignment. But exhaustion isn't healing, it's hiding. I realized that the hard way one morning when I woke up with my head on the kitchen table, my laptop still open, a half-written sentence blinking on the screen. So, I made a different choice. I booked my first therapy session. Walking into Dr. Catherine Lewis's office felt terrifying. I was used to being the strong one, the one who carried everything silently. But when she asked me why I was there, the truth tumbled out. My family threw me away, I whispered, tears streaming down my face. And I don't know who I am without them. She didn't flinch. She didn't minimize. She simply said, maybe this is your chance to discover who you are beyond them. Those words became a turning point. Week by week, therapy became a place where I unraveled years of hurt. I talked about being the middle child, about always feeling unseen. I talked about Dad being the only one who validated me. I talked about Daniel's cruelty, Megan's indifference, Mom's silence. And slowly, I began to understand. Their failure to see my worth didn't erase it. It only revealed their blindness. One day, Dr. Lewis asked me, "If you stopped trying to earn their love, what would you do with your life?" The question startled me. I had never thought of it that way. For so long, everything I did, every achievement, every visit home, every sacrifice, was tied to winning their approval. What would I do if I let that go? I didn't have the answer right away. But the seed had been planted. Meanwhile, the house began to change too. At first, it was overwhelming. Every corner whispered memories. The porch where Dad taught me to ride a bike. The kitchen where Mom baked cookies. The living room where Daniel once opened Christmas presents. It hurt to be surrounded by so much history. But instead of running, I decided to reclaim it. Room by room, I began to make it mine. I painted the walls in colors I loved. Soft blues, warm creams, a bold terracotta in the dining room. I replaced old curtains with ones that let in sunlight. I filled the shelves with my books, my photos, my art. The most powerful change came in Dad's study. It had always been his sacred space, lined with books, his desk covered in blueprints. For weeks, I couldn't even open the door. But one morning, I forced myself inside. Dust clung to every surface. His old reading glasses still sat on the desk. My throat tightened. I sat in his chair, closed my eyes, and whispered, "I'll take care of this, Dad. I promise." Then I began to transform it. Not by erasing him, but by blending him with me. I kept his shelves intact, but I added a corner for my own writing. I framed one of his old sketches and hung it above my desk. His presence remained, but now it shared space with my future. It became a place of peace instead of pain. As I rebuilt the house, I also rebuilt my connections. Sarah visited often, sometimes staying the weekend. We cooked dinners together, sat on the porch with wine, laughed until midnight. She reminded me that belonging wasn't about blood, it was about choice. Neighbors became unexpected allies. Mrs. Whitman brought over cookies and stories about my dad, and Jake came by regularly to help with repairs. Slowly, the house that once felt like a fortress of grief began to feel like community again. One evening, as the sun set behind the trees, I hosted a small gathering. Just a few friends, some neighbors, laughter echoing through the halls. At one point, I looked around the living room, my living room, and realized it was the first time in years that joy filled these walls without tension. It wasn't the family I was born into, but it was a family I was building. Healing also meant rediscovering myself. I began writing not just for work, but for me. Essays about grief, about family, about resilience. One piece, titled "The House That Tried to Erase Me," was published online and went viral. Messages poured in from strangers, people who had been disowned, excluded, erased. "Thank you for writing this," one woman messaged. I thought I was the only one. For the first time, my voice wasn't just mine, it was a lifeline for others. Dad once told me I was the strong one. Now I began to believe it. The final act of reclaiming came when I decided to open the house to more than just myself. I created a small writing retreat, inviting women who needed space to heal, to create, to breathe. Twice a year, a handful of strangers came to stay for a weekend. We shared meals around the oak table, wrote in journals, sat by the fireplace telling stories. The same table where I once sat invisible became a table where others felt seen. And every time I watched a guest smile, or cry, or write something that mattered, I felt Dad's presence. I knew he would have been proud. One afternoon, months later, I stood on the porch watering plants when a car pulled into the driveway. Daniel. He stepped out, his shoulders stiff, his face hard. Megan was in the passenger seat. For a moment, old fear surged in me. But then I remembered. This was my home now. Daniel approached the porch. "We need to talk," he said flatly. I shook my head. "Not here. Not unless I invite you in." He clenched his jaw. Megan scoffed. I didn't slam the door this time. I didn't shout. I simply turned back toward the house, my voice calm. I wish you both healing. But this is my space. And it's no longer open to those who tried to destroy me. And with that, I walked inside. The lock clicked behind me, and instead of feeling shut out, I felt safe. Healing, I've learned, isn't about fixing what's broken. It's about creating something new from the pieces. I lost the family I thought I had, but I gained myself. I gained a home that finally reflects who I am. I gained a community that sees me, values me, chooses me. And every time I walk through the front door, keys jingling in my hand, I remind myself, I'm not the outsider anymore. I'm the one who decides who belongs. If you've stayed with me through this entire story, first let me say, thank you. Sharing something this raw hasn't been easy. Reliving the pain, the humiliation, the loneliness, it's like reopening a wound that never fully healed. But I chose to share it because I know I'm not alone. Maybe you've been shut out by your own family. Maybe you've been made to feel invisible, like your voice didn't matter, like your existence was optional. Maybe the people who were supposed to love you the most became the ones who hurt you the deepest. If that's you, I want you to hear me clearly. You are not worthless. You are not expendable. And you are not alone. For a long time, I believed blood meant everything. That no matter how many times I was dismissed, ignored, or excluded, family ties were sacred. I told myself, if I just try harder, they'll see me. If I just achieve more, they'll be proud. If I just stay loyal, they'll finally love me the way I need. But here's the truth I had to learn the hard way. Family isn't defined by DNA. It's defined by respect, by love, by showing up when it matters. And sometimes, the people who share your blood are the very ones who least deserve your loyalty. That realization nearly broke me, but it also set me free. I share this because I know how lonely it feels to question your own worth. I know the nights of lying awake, asking, what's wrong with me? Why don't they love me the way I love them? I know how heavy it is to carry secrets, to carry rejection, to carry silence. But I also know this, you can survive it. You can rise from it. You can rebuild. If they don't see your value, it doesn't mean it isn't there. It means their vision is clouded. And if they lock you out, remember this, you can build a door of your own. You can hold the keys. When I think back to standing on that porch, Daniel's voice in my ears, you don't belong here, I remember the searing pain, the humiliation of being treated like a stranger in the place that raised me. But now, when I turn my own key in that lock, I realize something powerful. I don't need their permission anymore. They need mine. And that's not about revenge. It's not about holding power over them. It's about reclaiming myself. It's about finally standing tall in my own story, no longer begging for scraps of belonging, but creating belonging for myself. So, if you're watching this right now, and you've ever been cast aside, hear this. You don't need to shrink yourself to be accepted. You don't need to beg for love that comes with conditions. You don't need to sit at tables where your voice is silenced. You deserve to be seen. You deserve to be heard. You deserve to be loved fully, without question, without terms. And if your family of origin cannot give you that, you have the power to create a chosen family who will. I want to leave you with something my dad once wrote in his journal, words that I didn't fully understand until now. Sometimes, the strongest thing you can do is let go of the ones who hold you back. At first, those words felt like loss. But now, I see them as liberation. Letting go isn't failure. It's courage. It's saying, I will no longer accept less than I deserve. If this story resonates with you, I want to invite you to share your own experiences in the comments. Tell me, have you ever been made to feel like an outsider in your own family? Have you ever had to walk away from people who couldn't see your worth? Your story matters. And by sharing it, you might just give someone else the courage to keep going. Because the truth is, there are countless people out there who know this pain. And when we speak it aloud, when we refuse to carry it in silence, we create something powerful. Community. And community heals. So, to anyone listening, if you've ever been told you don't belong, I want you to flip that script. Say it with me. I belong to myself. I belong to my own future. I belong to the life I am building. And if you're still standing in the fire, still hurting, still searching, know that healing doesn't come all at once. It comes in small steps. A phone call to a friend, a walk in the sunshine, a journal entry, a tear finally released, a door closed to someone who doesn't deserve entry. Step by step, you will find yourself again. Before I end, I want to say this one more time. Family is not who shares your blood. Family is who shows up when it matters. Family is who listens to your story, who cheers for your victories, who sits with you in your grief. And sometimes, the family you create is far more loyal, far more loving, far more real than the one you were born into. So hold on to the ones who choose you, and never again beg for the ones who don't. If this story touched you, please don't just click away. Leave a comment. Share your truth. Let's make this more than a video. Let's make it a conversation, a circle of people who remind each other. You are not alone, and you are not unworthy. And if you want to hear more stories like this, raw, honest, and real, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because the more we tell the truth, the less power silence has over us. And finally, to the girl I used to be, the one who sat at that oak table trying to get a word in, the one who stared at glow-in-the-dark stars praying to be seen, the one who cried on the porch when the door was slammed shut, I want to say this. You made it. You're not invisible. You hold the keys now. And no one walks through the door unless you say so.